Continue with our lesson, but before that I would like to mention again that the accounting has revolutionized from manual to technologically advanced accounting, wherein there is a use of computerized accounting system. And in 1949 in 1494, Friar Luca Pacioli wrote a book which contains discussions on double entry bookkeeping system. Kasi hindi ko pala ito na-discuss kanina. So it is entitled Summa de Arithmetica, Geometria, Proportioni, et Proportionalita. Ang ibig sabihin nun, everything about arithmetic, geometry, proportions, and proportionality. This is a summary of the existing mathematical knowledge at that time. And because of that, because of Summa Friar Pacioli, kung ano man, paano mo yung basahin, he is considered as the father of double entry bookkeeping. Remember pag accounting, we use the double entry bookkeeping because of the basic accounting principle of dual effect. For an increase of a value of one account, there is a corresponding effect on another account, or decrease or increase of another account. So yan, yun yung double entry bookkeeping. And the father of double entry bookkeeping is Friar Pacioli. Yeah. So let's now go back to the elements. Di ba dito tayo nag-stop kanina? Yan. So we go now to the elements of financial statements. So what are these elements of financial statements? We have financial statements, diba? This is the byproduct of the accounting. This is the end product of accounting. From the time that you have identified a transaction until you have recorded the transaction, classified the accounts that are affected, then you will summarize all the transactions in order to present or prepare a financial statement. So ano ba yung mga iba't ibang financial statements natin? We have number 1, statement of financial position. Number 2, statement of comprehensive income. Number 3, statement of changes in owner's equity. Number 4, statement of cash flows. And lastly, number 5, notes to financial statements. So, isa-isayin natin. What are the elements? Ano bang mga nakabilang dyan sa financial statements na yan? The elements directly related to the measurement of financial position. So, dun sa statement of financial position, there is what we call assets, liabilities, and equity. Tatlo lang yan. Again, assets, liabilities, and equity. So, tandaan nyo si ALE. A-L-E, assets, liabilities, and equity. Pwede ding ALO, assets, liabilities, and owner's equity. Pwede ding ALC, assets, liabilities, and capital. So, sa equity is another term for owner's equity, and it's another term for capital. So, tatlo lang yan Pag statement of financial position, assets, liabilities, and equity. Pero kapag naman, statement of financial performance, dalawa lang yan. We have income and expenses. So, again, yung statement of financial performance, that is also the statement of comprehensive income or the income statement. Now, how about statement of changes in financial position, or what we call the statement of changes in equity, and statement of cash flows. So, ano naman yon? Lahat na yan. So, lahat. Si assets, liabilities, and equity, income, and expenses. So, kapag changes lang pinag-uusapan, lahat ng elements kasama. Changes in financial position, kasama si assets, liabilities, equity, income, and expense. Pag naman statement of cash flows, kasama din yung 5. Assets, liabilities, equity, income, and expense. Okay? So, again, pag statement of financial position, 3. Assets, liabilities, and owner's equity. Pag naman statement of financial performance or income statement, 2. Income and expense. Pero pag statement of changes in equity, statement of cash flows, lahat. Assets, liabilities, equity, and income and expenses. Now, let's go to the elements one by one. Elements pertaining to financial position. The elements of the financial position are the assets, liabilities, and equity. So, mamaya discuss natin yung accounting equation. Kasi ang accounting equation is assets is equal to liabilities plus owner's equity. Assets is equal to liabilities plus equity, or assets is equal to liabilities plus capital. So, ano ba yung assets na tinatawag? An asset is a resource owned and controlled by the enterprise. It is called an asset because it is expected to provide future economic benefits to the enterprise. So, yung economic benefits ay marireceive ni enterprise because of the resource owned and or controlled by the enterprise. So, it's not necessary that it is owned. It may be controlled. So, ano ba yung ibig sabihin ng controlled? Pag hindi mo own, kasi hindi ikaw yung may legal title over that property. Pag sinabi mong controlled, ayun nga, hindi ikaw yung may legal title over the property, you only have the right to possess the right to possess, or you have the right to use, or you have the right to exercise rights over the property. Okay? So, hindi necessary na owned as long as you have the right to it. So, what are the characteristics of assets? Number one, assets are resources owned and or controlled by the enterprise. So, it is necessary that it is owned and or controlled by the enterprise. Hindi mo pwedeng sasabihin, assets mo yan kung may pagmamay-ari na yan. So, dapat pagmamay-ari ni company. Okay? Assets are owned or controlled by the enterprise. If it is the assets of another company, hindi mo asset yan. Diba? Ganun naman sa buhay eh. Kung ano lang yung sa'yo, yun lang yung sa'yo. Diba? Assets. So next, assets are acquired by an enterprise as a result of past transaction or event. So it is necessary that the assets have already been acquired. It is a result of a past transaction or event. Kung i-acquire mo pa lang yung asset, hindi pa yan kasama sa financial statements. Hindi mo pwedeng i-record yan and present sa financial statements. Kapag i-acquire mo pa lang in the future, kailangan you have already acquired the asset. It must be a result of a past transaction or event. And lastly, the enterprise should have the capacity to restrict or prevent other entities from enjoying the economic benefits arising from the use of the resource or item. Kailangan may exclusive ownership or exclusive right si entity over the property or assets. Dapat siya lang yung mag-enjoy ng economic benefits. Otherwise, that is not an asset. That is not the asset of the corporation. So again, the enterprise should have the capacity to restrict or prevent other entities from enjoying the economic benefits arising from the use or the resource, arising from the use of the resource or item. So what are different examples of assets? We have cash. Madali lang yan. Alam niyo na yan. Cash. Money on hand or in banks and other items considered as medium of exchange in business transactions. So, cash on hand, yung mga nandyan sa possession mo, or cash in banks, those which are deposited in banks, and other items considered as medium of exchange, such as cash equivalents. Ano ba yung mga cash equivalents? Yung mga time deposit, yung mga treasury bills, yung mga commercial documents, the checks, yan. Those are cash equivalents. So, kasama din sila sa cash. So, ano ba yung cash na yan? It is an asset, a resource controlled or owned by the company, which has the probability of producing an inflow of economic benefit. May benefit si company dyan, cash eh. Pwede niyang magamit to purchase an item or any other property. So, what else? Accounts receivable. Yung mga accounts receivable, yan yung mga makukolekta mo from your customers which have arisen from the ordinary course of your trade or business. So, ano to? It says here that these are the valid claims from customers or clients arising from the provision of of services or delivery of goods in the ordinary course of business, where the price for these services or goods have not yet been paid. So, for example, merchandising company ka, nagbabuy and sell ka ng office supplies or school supplies. Nangyari, bumili si customer, pero hindi pa niya babayaran. Sabi niya, uy, pabili nga po ako ng 10 boxes or reams ng bond paper. Bayaran ko na lang po next week. So, nakapagbenta ka na, ano? Pero, hindi mo pa natanggap yung pera. Marireceive mo pa lang yung payment niya next week. And what are you going to do? You recognize an asset, and that is what you call accounts receivable. These are valid claims. Claims, ibig sabihin, may makukolekta ka from your customers. So, valid claims. There must be a basis. And that basis must be either rendition of services or provision of services or delivery of goods in the ordinary course of business. Pag hindi siya nag-arise from ordinary course of business, yung mga claims nyo, yung mga makukolekta nyo, ang tawag doon ay other receivables. Pero pag related siya sa pagbebenta mo o pag-render mo ng service, ang tawag sa kanya ay accounts receivable. What else? Supplies on hand. This refers to supplies purchased by an enterprise which are unused as of the reporting date. So, yung mga supplies na natira, assets mo yun. Assets mo pa rin yun. So, isasama mo siya sa financial statements. Ano may example niyan? Yung mga office supplies, bond paper, envelopes, cartridges, printer cartridges, pencils, paper clips, and all others. All other supplies. Mga kung ano-ano pang supplies. So, kahit hindi naman supplies, kung ano pang mga properties na naku, may tuko, na ina-earn, na pagmamayari ni corporation or ni enterprise, lahat yan, assets yan. As long as they are owned or controlled by the enterprise. And that it has the probability of bringing an economic benefit to the enterprise or corporation. Okay? So, how about the merchandise inventory? Merchandise inventory, ito yung mga goods which are bought from suppliers for resale to customers at a higher price than the cost. So, yun yung mga ibibenta mo din. So, pag nagbabuy and sell ka, ikaw ay isang merchandising enterprise. So, you buy from your supplier and you sell it at a higher price. And those goods are called your merchandise inventory. That is your asset. Pag ikaw naman ay manufacturing company, you manufacture goods. You convert the raw materials into a finished goods. Ang tawag naman doon ay hindi merchandise inventory. Tawag naman doon ay finished goods pag manufacturing. So, asset mo rin yun. Pati yung mga raw materials mo, asset mo din yun. Tsaka yung mga, any other property owned and controlled by the corporation or the enterprise, as long as it has the probability of bringing an economic benefit to the enterprise. Ano pa? Property, plant, and equipment. Long-lived assets, yung mga trucks, delivery trucks, land and building, machinery, furniture, fixture, the equipment, transportation, vehicles, and all other property, plant, and equipment which are used in the operation of the enterprise. So, as long as they are used in the operation of the enterprise, they are called property, plant, and equipment. And these are classified as assets. So, ano ba? Basta assets, wala namang exclusive na enumeration. Kung ano, lahat ng mga properties owned and controlled by the corporation or enterprise, as long as they have the probability of bringing benefit, economic benefit to the corporation, that is called an asset. Ay, ano naman yung liability? Liability is a present obligation of the enterprise arising from past events. So again, past events. Meron kang pinagkakautangan ngayon na nangyari or nautang mo dati. So, present obligation siya arising from past events which are to be settled in the future. So, pag pinagkakautangan ka ngayon dahil nangutang ka dati, na kailangan mong bayaran in the future. So, tandaan nyo na, present obligation. Dapat, meron ka pang obligation ngayon. Kasi kung nabayaran mo na, it is no longer your liability. You don't have to include that in the financial statements. It must be present obligation. And it must arose from past events. And, kailangan may obligation to settle in the future. Kasi, once na hindi ka na obliged to settle that in the future, then that is no longer your liability. For example, kinondone or pinatawad na ni lender yung utang mo. Sabi ni lender, sige na, dahil suki naman kita, wag mo nang bayaran yung utang mo dati. Pag sinabing huwag mo nang bayaran, wala kang obligasyon para isettle yun. You don't have the obligation na. So, what will you do? Then, you should not recognize it as your liability. Because again, liability is a present obligation arising from past events, which are to be settled in the future. So, sa madaling sabi, ito yung lahat ng mga utang. This refer to the debts of the business. So, it may be settled through paying cash, or delivery of goods, or provision of services, or settled in some other form. So, same lang din si liabilities kay assets. These arose from past events. So, si assets, dapat na-acquire mo na siya before bago mo isama sa assets mo or sa financial statements. The same with liabilities. It must have arose or arisen from past events. Kailangan utang mo na talaga siya. Hindi yung mangungutang ka pa lang, isasama na sa financial statements. No. Dapat, it arose from past events. Okay. So, when a company purchases merchandise inventory on account or on credit, it incurs liability to supplier of the inventory. So, kagaya, di ba kanina, naalala nyo, meron tayong accounts receivable. Yun yung mga utang ni customer sa atin. Utang ni customer sa atin, may sabihin, may matatanggap tayo in the future. Pero, pag tayo naman yung nangutang, no? Pag tayo naman nangutang, tayo yung may liability. Tayo yung may accounts payable. So, yan sinasabi dito. When a company purchases merchandise inventory on account or on credit, it incurs a liability to the supplier of the inventory. Ano pa? Example, when a company borrows money from the bank, the borrowing transaction creates a liability in favor of the bank. So, tayo naman yung nangutang sa bangko. So, maraming forms ng liabilities. Nangutang sa bangko, hindi kaya nangutang sa supplier mo. Kasi, bumili ka ng goods, hindi mo pa nababayaran. Yan, liability yung mga yan. There are different examples of liability. Mamaya, babanggitin natin, no? But, we have to characterize first the liabilities. These are the characteristics of liabilities. First, the liability is a present obligation. So, dapat obligation mo siya ngayon. Meron ka pang obligation which arose from the past event. Paulit-ulit na yan, di ba? It is a present obligation arising from a past event. And you must be required to settle it in the future. So, dapat present obligation na dapat bayaran mo in the future. And those arose from the past event. So, yun yung characteristic ng liabilities. And what are the different examples? Example, number 1, accounts payable. Amounts due or payable to suppliers for goods purchased on account or for services rendered on account. So, ito yung kabaliktaran ni accounts receivable. Tayo ang nagkautang kay suppliers. So, remember ha, dapat, it must arose out of the ordinary course of business. Kailangan, ito ay from our activity of buying goods from our suppliers or from the rendition of services by third persons. Dapat, it arose from trade or business. So, example nito is supplier of goods. Nagbumili tayo ng goods from our suppliers. May utang tayo, tawag dyan ay accounts payable. Pero, if any other payable or any other liability na hindi in-incur na related doon sa primary activity ni business, ang tawag mo doon ay other receivables. Pero pag galing sa supplier mo yung goods na hindi mo nabayaran or galing doon sa nagre-render sa'yo ng service, hindi accounts payable ang tawag doon. Other liabilities or other payables. Okay? Para siyang accounts receivable. Diba? Nabanggit natin kanina. Pag related siya sa pagbebenta mo ng goods or pagre-render mo ng service, ang tawag mo ay accounts receivable. Yung mga matatanggap mo sa customers, yung mga makukolekta mo pa lang. Pero pag meron ka namang mga makukolekta na hindi naman related sa pagbebenta mo ng goods or pagre-render mo ng service, other receivables naman ang tawag mo doon. No. Ano pa? Example ng liabilities. Salaries payable. Salaries due to employees which are unpaid as of reporting date. So, example, kung yung sweldo ng employee mo hanggang August 31 ay hindi mo pa nababayaran ngayong August 31, mababayaran mo pa lang siya on September 5 kasi yun yung bayaran lagi ng sweldo, edi sa September 5 mo pa, sa September 5 mo pa siya mababayaran, edi ibig sabihin ngayong August 31, utang mo pa siya. So, salaries payable mo siya. These are the salaries due to employees which are unpaid as of reporting date. What else? Utilities payable. These are the amounts due or payable to utility companies for electricity, heat, light, and water charges. Yan yung mga usual na gastos mo. Yung kuryente mo, yung mga tubig mo. Diba, na kwento natin kayo na accrual basis of accounting, nakakatanggap ka ng bill at the end of the month, or at the first week of the succeeding month, which pertain to your expenses, the electricity or water expenses for the previous month. Kaya, at the end of that previous month, you recognize your liability, your accounts payable. Diba? You recognize the expenses when they are incurred, not when they are paid. So, you have here utilities payable. Yan yung mga unpaid electricity, heat, light, and water charges or any other menial expenses related to utilities. How about advances from customers? These pertain to the amounts received from customers in advance for the delivery of the goods or provision of services. So, kapag nagbayad in advance si customer, hindi mo yun asset, hindi mo din income yun. Anong tawag mo doon? Yun ay liability mo. Diba kanina meron tayong accounts payable? Kasi si customers usually late nagbabayad. Bibili siya ngayon ng goods or tayo magre-render tayong services sa kanya pero hindi mo na niya babayaran. Wala pa daw siyang pambayad. Bukas or next week niya babayaran. Pero ito naman sa advances from customers, this is different. Nagbayad in advance si customer. Pero kahit nagbayad in advance si customer, let's say nagbayad siya ng cash, o sige may cash tayo, that's an asset. But the fact that you have the obligation to deliver the goods or to provide services in exchange for the cash that you have received, that is a liability. And that is what we call advances from customers. So that is a liability. Advances or amounts received from customers in advance for the delivery of goods or provision of services. What else? Loans payable. Obligations of an enterprise to lenders, such as banks and finance companies, which are to be paid on demand or at a specific future date agreed between the enterprise and the lender. So, loans payable yan. Mga babayaran mo sa mga banks or financial institutions. What else? Mortgage payable. Yun yung mga utang na may security. Meron kang collateral. Mortgage payable. Either real estate mortgage, kung saan yung lupa or any immovable property is used as a security for the obligation. Ayan ang tinatawag ng mga real mortgage payable. Or meron tayong tinatawag na chattel mortgage. Yun yung may utang tayo, kumari, nangutang sa sasakyan, pambili ng sasakyan. Tapos, ang ginawa mong security para magkaroon ng assurance na babayaran mo sila, minortgage mo ngayon yung sasakyan mo. So, tawag naman doon chattel mortgage. Ano pa? Marami pa. So, hindi siya exclusive enumeration. Depende yan sa nature ng liabilities. But as long as these are present obligations arising from past events, which gives us the obligation to settle it in the future, then that is classified as liabilities. So, kanina, di ba nabanggit natin yung advances from customers and yung mga amounts received in advance from customers in payment for the goods which are to be delivered in the future or the services which are to be rendered in the future. Liability yan. Paano naman kung tayo yung nagbayad in advance? Asset mo naman yun. O, anong tawag doon? Prepaid expenses. Assets yun. Tayo yung nagbayad in advance sa mga goods na marireceive natin or sa mga services na i-render nila sa atin. So, if we paid in advance, that is what we call prepaid expenses or prepayments. That is our asset. Okay? Now, we have equity. Ano ulit yung elements ng statement of financial position? We have the assets, liabilities, and equity. Or, this is what we call owner's equity. Or, this is what we call capital. So, technically, creditors and owners have both claims on the assets of the enterprise. Si creditors, ano yung claim niya sa assets ng enterprise? It is the liability. Pag si owner naman, ang tawag niya sa claim niya doon sa assets ng enterprise, that is what we call equity or owner's equity. Or, it is also called as capital. In accounting parlance, when the word equity is used, it refers to owner's equity. So, sabi, equity is the residual interest in the assets of the enterprise after deducting all its liabilities. So, yung enterprise, di ba, may assets yan. May assets. Lahat ng assets na yan ay i-divide mo sa dalawa. Yung iba, pambabayad mo sa creditors mo. Yung natira naman, yan ang stake ni owners. Kaya, equity is the residual interest in the assets of the enterprise after deducting all its liabilities. Equity refers to the claim of the owners of the enterprise to the assets of the business after all the claims of the creditors have been settled or paid. Okay? Mapakita ko lang sa inyo yung example. Ayan. So, assets, actually, our accounting equation is assets is equal to liabilities plus capital. Or, assets is equal to liabilities plus owner's equity. Or, pwede ding assets is equal to liabilities plus equity. So, ALE. Tandaan nyo si ALE ha. Assets is equal to liabilities plus equity. Or ALO. Assets is equal to liabilities plus owner's equity. Or si ALC. Assets is equal to liabilities plus capital. Tandaan nyo yan. So, ngayon, kung ganyan ang accounting equation, ano ngayon ang capital or owner's equity? So, the capital is owner's equity or the capital is assets minus liabilities. Kaya sinabi na residual interest. Kasi diba, pag tinranspose mo, how to get owner's equity, you transpose the liabilities to the other side. So, it will become assets less liabilities. Owner's equity is equal to assets less liability. O, pareho lang din. Capital is equal to assets minus liabilities. Ayan. Ganyan siya. Okay? Residual interest. Kasi di ba naalala nyo kanina, the assets, the stake in the assets is divided into two. It must be attributed to the creditors for the liabilities and the residual interest would be for the owners in the form of capital. So, meron pa nakalagay dito sa book. Anong sabi pa dito sa book? Sabi, equity arises from, so aside from the fact that it is the residual interest, or it is the stake of the owners of the entity after deducting all its liabilities, it also arises from the original investment by an owner into the business, increased by additional investment and any profit earned during the period, and decreased by the losses incurred during the period, and decreased by withdrawals of the owner during the period. So, sa madaling sabi, capital end is equal to the investments, original investments, plus additional investments, plus any profit earned during the year, or kung losses man, less losses during the year or net loss. And pag nag-withdraw si owner, ayaw na niya, babawasan yung investment niya, less withdrawals. So, equal to the ending capital. Yan yon. So, pakita natin sa equation. Ito yan. So, capital beginning, ito rin yung paraan. So, aside from getting the capital by deducting the liabilities from the assets, we can also get the capital end by computing the beginning capital plus additional investments, if there are any, plus any income earned, less any withdrawals, and less losses, if there are any. And so, you will have now the ending capital. Again, to compute for your capital at the end of the year, at the end of the period, beginning capital plus investments, plus any income earned, less any withdrawals, and less any losses, you will now have your capital end or ending capital. Equal yan dito sa capital na assets minus liabilities. So, ma-appreciate nyo yan sa chapter 3 kasi magko-compute tayo. So, yun na ngayon, no? Equity is a claim or the claim of the stakeholders or the owners pala. The owners of the enterprise. So, again, as a recap, pag elements of statement of financial position, tatlo lang yun. ALE, assets, liabilities, and equity. Assets, liabilities, and capital, or assets, liabilities, and owners, equity. Pero pag pinag-uusapan naman, elements pertaining to the performance or profitability. Ano naman yan? Elements pertaining to performance or profitability, ito yung income and expenses. Ito yung income statement natin. So, dalawa lang yan. Income and expenses. Ano naman ibig sabihin ng income? Pag income, it refers to the increase of economic benefit. Increase during the period in the form of inflows or enhancements of assets or decrease of liability that result in the increase in equity. Other than those relating to contributions from equity participants. So again, pag nag-increase ang economic benefit during the period to the corporation, enterprise, or partnership, in the form of inflows or increase in assets, meron tayong income. Or, pag meron tayong decrease in liabilities, meron tayong income. Yan. So, result ng increase ng equity daw. So yung income kasi actually, that is the effect of the economic inflow. So, these economic inflow are in the form of increase in assets or decrease in liabilities, which has the ultimate effect of increasing the equity. So, kailan ba nagkakaroon ng income? The income encompasses both revenue and gains. We have revenue if in the ordinary course of business or in the ordinary activities of an enterprise, there is sales, fees, interest, dividends, royalties, and rent. So, lahat ng mga inflow of economic benefit to the corporation, to the enterprise, lahat ng inflow na yan, pag related siya sa ordinary trade activities or ordinary activities ni enterprise, yan ay tinatawag na revenue. Pag yung increase in economic flow or benefit ay nanggaling sa activity na hindi naman normal doon sa trade or business ni corporation or ni enterprise, then that is what we call gain. O again, revenue siya pag ordinary activities, gain siya pag hindi naman arising from ordinary activities. So what are the examples of revenue? Yung sales, yung fees, interest, dividends, royalties, and rent. Kasi yung mga yan, nanggaling sa ordinary activity sales. Kung nagbebenta ka talaga, revenue mo yan. Kasi normal yan na nangyayari sa company. So, examples. The examples of business transactions that give rise to revenues are, pagka dental clinic, dentist earns fees for providing dental care to clients. And then another one, a repair service are rendered for customers either for cash or on credit. Another one, electric appliances are sold to customers. Professor renders teaching services. And then barber providing hair cutting services. Yan. So, yan yung mga transactions arising, or giving rise to revenues because this is normal. This arose from the ordinary trade activities or ordinary trade of business. Okay? Pag gain naman, it represents other items that meet the definition of income, which did not arise, may or may not arise, in the ordinary course of activities. Ano example niyan? Yung mga hindi naman laging nangyayari. The sale of land. Lagi ka bang magbibenta ng land? Hindi. Generally, hindi. May exception, mamaya sasabihin natin. So, pag nagbenta ng land, and that the land owned by the enterprise is sold at a price higher than the acquisition cost. So, kung mas mahal na binenta kaysa sa kung ano yung halaga niya ngayon, the income from the sale will be considered as gain, not revenue. Kasi, pag merchandise inventory ka or manufacturing industry ka, hindi ka naman lagi magbebenta ng land. Mamaya, exception. O ano pa example? Sale of company's transportation vehicle. Pag nagbenta ng mga delivery trucks or nagbenta ng mga transportation vehicles, yan ba lagi bang ginagawa ng enterprise yan or ng corporation? Hindi naman, di ba? That is only isolated transactions. So, any income earned from the transaction wherein the selling price is higher than the realizable value or carrying value of the vehicle at the time of sale, that income will be considered as gain, hindi revenue. So, exception to the general rule. Paano kapag ang business ni company ay nagbebenta ng lupa? Edi kung nagbebenta siya ng lupa, yung income niya doon ay recognized as revenue. Kasi, ordinary trade and business niya yun. Ordinary niyang ginagawa, normal niyang ginagawa na magbebenta siya ng lupa. Paano naman kung nagbebenta siya ng sasakyan or dealer siya ng sasakyan? Magbebenta siya lagi ng van, edi hindi niya gain yun, yung pinagbenta, yung income dun sa pinagbentahan ng sasakyan, yun ay revenue. Naintindihan? So, if the transaction is not ordinary or not normal in the trade or business, any income earned from it will be considered as gain. But, if the transaction is normal or ordinary in the trade or business, then any income earned will be considered as revenue. Okay? So, ito nakalagay. It is revenue or is it revenue or is it gain? The nature of a transaction in relation to the nature of a company's operations, we determine whether the income is classified as revenue or as gain. So, depende sa nature ng transaction. Wala namang hard and fast rule. Wala namang fixed na rule. It depends on the transaction or the nature of the transaction in each enterprise. For example, the sale of land. Ito yung sinabi natin kaya, di ba? The sale of land by a real estate company is considered as revenue. Since real estate companies normally sell land, but the income from the sale of land owned by an IT company is considered as a gain only. O, yun. So, hindi naman normal kasi na nagbebenta ng lupa si IT company. That's why it is considered as gain kapag may income siya. Since IT companies do not sell land in the ordinary course of doing business. But if it is the real estate company who sold the land, then any income will be considered as revenue. About expenses, di ba kaya na income, it is an increase in the economic benefit in the form of increase in assets or decrease in liabilities, and which has the ultimate effect of increasing the equity. Pag expenses naman, kabaliktaran, there is a decrease in economic benefits during the accounting period in the form of outflows or depletions of assets, or incidences of liabilities that result in the decrease in equity, other than those relating to the distributions of equity participants. Naalala niyo ba yung kanina sinabi natin sa income? It is an increase in, it has the ultimate increase in equity aside from the contributions to the corporation or to the enterprise. Ganon din kapag expenses. It is the decrease in the economic flow of benefit which result in a decrease in equity other than those relating to the distributions to equity participants. So, ito yung sinasabi niya. Ito yun. Yung expenses. Dito siya. Kasi ultimately, it will decrease the equity or the ending capital other than the withdrawals. The same is true with income. Sabi, di ba, income is an ultimate increase in equity. Mag-i-increase si equity, mag-i-increase ending capital other than the investment. So, other than the investments, yung increase na equity ay galing kay income. Yun yung gusto niyang sabihin. Balik tayo sa expenses. What is the definition of expenses? It encompasses both expenses, normal expenses, and the losses. Kanina pag income, it encompasses the revenue and the gain. Pag expenses, it encompasses the expenses and the losses, as well as those expenses that arise in the ordinary course of enterprise. Okay. Now, what are the different examples of expenses that arise in the ordinary course of business? Again, this is not an exclusive enumeration, ha? It depends on the nature of the transactions. So, example, salaries. Yan, incurred yan in the ordinary course of business. Di ba? Pag may empleyado ka, may salaries expense ka. Another one, rent expense. Pag nagre-renta ka ng apartment or ng unit for your business, then that is your ordinary expense, rent expense. What else? Expenses for utility. Electricity, water, and other utilities. Yan, ordinary yan sa business. What else? The cost of supplies sold. So, yung cost na merchandise inventory mo, na ibebenta mo, na ordinary sa business mo, it happens all the time, then that is called expense also. What else? The taxes, licenses, and business permit. Yan. It is related to the ordinary course of business. So, it's called expenses. What else? Professional fees, commissions paid, advertising, promotion expenses, and etc. Whereas, when you say losses, this represents other items that meet the definition of expenses, but it may or may not arise in the course of activities or in the course of the ordinary activities of the enterprise. Ito yung mga isolated transactions. For example, yung kanina, di ba, nagbenta ka ng lupa. Kung mas mataas kanina yung pinagbentahan mo kaysa doon sa halaga ng lupa, meron kang gain. Pero pag mas mababa mo binenta, yung land, kaysa dun sa halaga ng land, what do you have? You have a loss. Or you don't have the expense because that is not ordinary in your business. You have a loss because that is an isolated transaction. May exemption ulit mamaya, pero discuss natin mamaya. O another example, there is a natural disaster in the form of flood or in the form of fire, which caused damage to your building, machinery and equipment, or to your goods or merchandise inventory. O kunwari, nagkaroon ng baha. Tapos inabot yung mga inventory mo, yung mga ibebenta mo sana na t-shirt. O nagbebenta ka ng t-shirt tapos bumaha. Ngayon, namantsahan na ngayon yung mga t-shirt na yun. So, hindi mo na pwede ibenta yun. Meron ng damage. So, dahil hindi naman lagi nagkakaroon ng baha, that is an isolated event or transaction, you have a loss. Hindi expense yun. Loss on damages to goods. O kapag din nasunugan, ganun din, loss din yun. Because it is not ordinary in the trade or business. What else? Ayan pala yung mga sinasabi ko. Nandyan pala. Caused by fire, caused by natural disasters, caused by isolated transactions, those are losses. O exception to the rule, gaya nung kanina. Kung nagbebenta ka, isa kang realty company, nagbebenta ka lagi ng land, any loss, anything na lower doon sa price, doon sa value ng land na binenta mo, hindi mo loss yun. Kumbaga, cost mo yun. Expense mo yun. Okay? So, basta ganun yung palatandaan nyo, ha? Pagka anything that is related in the ordinary course of business, it's either income or expense. But if it is not arising from the ordinary course of business such that these are isolated transactions, it may be gain or loss. Okay? So again, as a recap, what are the elements of statement of financial position? Tatlo lang yan. ALE. Or do you want it ALO? Or do you want it ALC? Assets, liabilities, capital, assets, liabilities, owner's equity, or assets, liabilities, and equity. Pero pag statement of performance, statement of comprehensive income, dalawa lang yan. Income and expenses. Now, let's go to the recognition of elements. Di ba alam na natin yung elements? Ano yung mga accounts affected? Ano yung mga dapat nating i-record? Now, the question is, when will you recognize? When will you record these elements of financial statements? When will you recognize the assets? Kailan ka magre-record ng cash? Kailan ka magre-record ng equipment? Kailan ka magre-record ng kung ano-ano pang assets? There is what we call recognition principle. This is the process of incorporating in the statement of financial position or statement of comprehensive income an item that meets the definition of an element and satisfies the criteria for recognition. Kailangan it satisfies the criteria for recognition. So, ito yung general criteria. There are two. First, there must be probability of a future economic benefit. Either increase in future economic benefit or decrease in future economic benefit. O, ayan. So, it is probable that an economic benefit with the item or as associated with the item will flow to, so papunta sa corporation, madadagdagan yung corporation ng economic benefit or will flow from. Pag sinabi mong flow from the corporation, mababawasan yung economic benefit from the enterprise. Oh, but remember the word probable. That is very important. The word probable is very important in the sense that when you say probable, the likelihood of happening is more than 50%. Hindi siya possible. That's different from possible. When you say possible, there is a likelihood of happening or not happening. Posible lang. Pwedeng mangyari o pwedeng hindi. Pero pag sinabi pong probable, the likelihood of happening is higher than the likelihood of not happening because the likelihood of of happening, pag sinabi mong probable, is more than 50%. Mas malaki yung chance na mangyari kaysa hindi. Yan ang probable. So, the first criteria must be that it is probable that an economic benefit or future economic benefit will flow to or will flow from the enterprise. And, it's not enough ha, hindi or. And yan. It is the item or the cost or value must be measured with reliability. Alam natin na meron tayong future economic benefit, increase or decrease. Alam natin yan. Pero, mami-measure mo ba? Can you measure it with reliability? Hindi pwede na forecast lang. Hindi pwedeng forecast kasi pag forecast lang, possible mangyari or probable mangyari, pero hindi pa natin alam kung magkano. Kaya yung mga forecasted sales na yan, hindi pa yan nire-record because we cannot measure with reliability. We cannot fully ascertain how much is the amount of sale. We only record the sale at the time of occurrence of the sale. At the time of earning the income from the sale. So there must be measurement with reliability. So, hindi enough na it can be measured. The basis of measurement must be with reliability. So, remember the two recognition principle or the criteria for recognition. Number one, the item it must be probable that there is a future economic benefit which will flow to or flow from the enterprise and the cost or value of which can be measured with reliability. So, tandaan yung dalawang keyword o tatlong keywords. Una, probable, and then future economic benefit. Hindi pala tatlo, marami palang keywords yan. Sa number 1, probable and future economic benefit. And then sa number 2, measured, the cost or value must be measured with reliability. So, let us summarize now the two criteria for each element. So, number 1, asset. An asset is recognized in a statement of financial position when it is probable that the future economic benefits will flow to. So, mag-i-increase kasi asset Mag-i-increase ng future economic benefit papunta sa enterprise. And the asset as a cost or value can be measured reliably. So, important yun na may measure dapat reliably yung cost. Another one, pag liability naman, it is recognized in the financial statement or financial position when it is probable. Don't forget the word probable. That an outflow of resources embodying economic benefits will result from the settlement of a present obligation and that the amount which the settlement will take place can be measured reliably. Dapat probable na merong outflow of resources kapag nagbayad na tayo ng utang. So, pag hindi mo naman alam kung babayaran mo o hindi, huwag mo i-record si liability. There must be probability that there will be an outflow of resources and that the amount for which the liability will be settled can be measured reliably. Pag income naman, must be recognized in the statement of comprehensive income when increase in future benefits, increase kasi income related to the increase in asset or decrease of liability has arisen can be measured reliably. So, ganun ulit. Dapat may increase in economic benefit and it must be measured reliably. And pag expenses naman, kabaligtaran. There must be a decrease in future economic benefits and that the amount can be measured reliably. So, alam na natin yung criteria. Diba? Una, alam na natin kung ano yung elements. Ano ba yung kabilang sa financial position, ano yung mga kabilang sa financial performance, paano natin sila i-record, ano yung criteria, alam na natin. Ngayon naman, ano naman yung basis ng measurement? So, we have different basis of measurement. As what is mentioned in the book, there is historical cost, current cost, and reliable or settlement value. And another one, present value. So we use these different measurement bases as our basis of measurement. So, ginagamit natin to para malaman kung ano ba yung value na ilalagay natin sa financial statement. So, number 1, historical cost. So, class, mapapansin nyo, ba't ang daming cost? Ang dami yan. Iba't iba kasi ang assets na pinanggagamitan ng mga yan. So, iintindihan nyo yan in the future pagka nagre-record na tayo ng transactions. But as of now, it is just required for us to have a background or understanding, basic understanding of the different measurement bases. Number 1, historical cost. Pag sinabi mong historical cost, that is equivalent to the acquisition cost. Magkano mo ba nabili ang isang bagay nung time na nag-transact kayo? Yan yun, historical. From the moment that the event has transpired, you record the amount of the asset or the amount of the liability at the time or at the value when it was acquired or when it was settled. Okay? Example, assets are recorded at the amount of cash equivalents paid or fair value of the consideration given to acquire them at the time of their acquisition. No, example, bumili ka ng building. Kung magkano mo binayaran nung binili mo, yun ang magiging value niya sa financial statements. Okay? That is the historical cost. Yung history ba, kung kailan mo nabili. Yung acquisition cost, yan. Yung amount kung magkano mo siya na-acquire. Yan. Historical or acquisition cost. Kapag liability naman, liability are provided at the time of proceeds received in exchange for the obligation. So, pag liability naman, nangutang ka, di ba? Nangutang ka ngayon. Magkano ang natanggap mong pera para dun sa utang or magkano yung equivalent value niya at that time of the transaction, at the time of incurrence of the obligation. Yun yung amount na i-record mo. So, sa madaling sabi, ang historical cost ay acquisition cost or historical cost. You go back to the history. You go back when the transaction has transpired. Now, next, we go to the current cost. Ano ba ibig sabihin ng current cost? Assets are carried at the amount of cash or cash equivalents that they would have been paid if the same or an equivalent asset was acquired currently. So, current cost. Gusto niya lang sabihin, kailangan kasi nire-revisit. Ito yung mga asset na kailangan i-revisit. Kailangan mong i-revisit from the time na in-acquire mo siya, ni-record mo siya, kailangan mo i-restate kung ilan yung amount niya ngayon. Yun, current cost. Assets are carried at the amount of cash or cash equivalents that they would have been paid if the same or equivalent asset was acquired currently. Liabilities are carried at undiscounted amount of cash or cash equivalents that would be required to settle the obligation currently. So, ano mga example sa current cost? Yung mga foreign exchange. Yan, foreign exchange. Kung may $1 bill ka na binili mo last year, magkano mo siya binili last year? Sabihin natin 45 pesos. Ngayon, meron ka pa rin $1 bill. Yan pa rin yung $1 bill mo ngayon. Pero pag nilagay mo na yan sa financial statements, yung $1 bill mo na yan must be carried at the current cost. Magkano ang halaga niya? Dati 45 yan, di ba? Kung historical cost na nagagamitin natin, 45 lang nakalagay sa financial statements mo. But, when we are talking about foreign currencies, we take it or we carry it at current cost. So, kung 51 na ngayon, 51 pesos dapat nakalagay sa financial statements. Next, realizable value or settlement value. Pag assets, ang tawag realizable value. Pag naman liabilities, ang tawag settlement value. This means that the assets are carried at the amount of cash or cash equivalent that could currently be obtained by selling the assets in an orderly disposal. So, ano ba sabihin? Realizable value. Magkano ba ang marirealize mo pag binenta mo ngayon? Yan yung realizable value. Ano bang mga example niyan? Yung mga property, plant, and equipment. Diba? Nung binili mo sila, tama, historical cost gagamitin mo. Pag binili mo sila, kung magkano yung acquisition cost, dapat i-record mo siya at historical or acquisition cost. Magkano mo siya binili, yun ang i-record mo. Pero at the end of the year, lagi-lagi, even if it is recorded initially as acquisition cost or historical cost, it must be also carried at realizable value at the end of the year. Lagi pa rin dinedetermine kung magkano yung net realizable value niya. Magkano kaya siya marirecover pag binenta ngayon. Yun. Magkano ang marirealize natin pag binenta natin ngayon? Magkano lang natin siya maibibenta? So sabi, the assets are carried at the amount that could be obtained by selling the assets in an orderly disposal. So here, we recognize the depreciation. So we recognize the normal wear and tear, i-minus mo dun sa historical cost, yun yung magiging realizable value. Magkano lang natin siya marirealize pag binenta natin ngayon. How about the liabilities? Liabilities are carried at settlement values. Magkano mo ba siya mababayaran ngayon? So, what is the undiscounted amount of cash or cash equivalents expected to be paid to satisfy the liabilities in the normal course of business? We should not include the interest yet in the future. So, ano ba example niyan? Sabihin natin na nagkaroon ako ng utang. Sabi ko, mangutang ako ng 10,000 pesos. Tapos sabi ni kumpare ko, 10% interest niya na every year ha. O sige. So ngayon, 10,000 pesos. So meron na, kung dumaan na isang taon, meron akong 11,000 pesos na nautang. Pero payable siya after 5 years. So dapat, kung magkano lang yung isa-settle ko kung ngayon, kung magkano lang ilalabas ko ngayon, kung ngayon ko babayaran, yun lang yung value niya na naka-present dapat sa financial statements. So, kung ngayon yung second year, magkano lang ang value niya sa financial statements ko? 12,000 pesos. Hindi siya dapat 15,000. Hindi ko muna i-account yung interest in the future. Kung magkano lang yung settlement value niya ngayon. So, yun, ibig sabihin. That is the undiscounted amount. Okay? Settlement value. And then, present value. Assets are carried at the present discounted value of the future net cash inflows that the item is expected to generate in the normal course of business. How much is the present value? Magkano ang value niya ngayon? And then, pag liabilities naman, carried at the present discounted value of the future net cash outflows that are expected to be required to settle the liabilities. So, kailan ba ito ginagamit? Ginagamit to class kapag mga investment securities. Investment in either bonds or other security or other financial instruments. So, present value. For example, nag-invest ako ngayon sa isang company. Sabi ni company sa akin, mag-invest ka. Ngayon, kung bibigyan mo ko ng 1 million, in the future, magiging 1.5 million yan. So, kung magre-record ako ngayon sa aking financial statements, magkano ko i-present yung aking investment? 1 million or 1.5 million? 1 million lang. Present value lang. Hindi ko muna isasama yung interest in the future. Kung magkano lang yung present discounted value without considering the future net cash inflows. Yun ang present value. The same is true pag liabilities. O pag liabilities, kagaya ng sinabi kanina, di ba? Current value, present value. Or yung settlement value. Sabihin natin, di ba ako yung nag-invest kanina? O on the perspective naman nung investing corporation. After 5, di ba, nagbigay ako ng 1 million sa kanya. After 5 years, babayaran niya ako ng 1.5 million. Pero kung ngayon natin i-represent din sa financial statements, magkano liability niya sa akin? 1 million pa lang. Hindi natin sasama yung 500,000 na interest ko in the future. So, ang liability niya lang sa akin ngayon is 1 million. Pag dumaan na yung 5 years, saka natin i-record yung 1.5 million as the liability. Naintindihan? Present value. Now, let's go to qualitative characteristics of financial statements. We have different qualitative characteristics. So, ito yung sinasabi natin kanina na quality ng financial statements. When is the financial statements useful to users? Kailan mo ba masasabi na useful ang financial statements? Kapag may value ito. Kapag may qualitative characteristics. And we have 4 qualitative characteristics. Number 1, the relevance. Number 2, the reliability. Number 3, the understandability. And number 4, the comparability. So, the relevance and the reliability refer to the content of financial statements. Kung ano yung laman, ano yung very essence ng financial statements. Pero pag sinabi mo naman understandability and comparability, this refers to the way of financial statements are presented. So, form lang yan. So, pag content, reference and reliability. Pero pag yung form or way of presentation, yan naman yung comparability and understandability. Now, let's go to relevance. Relevance has different ingredients. Ano ba muna ibig sabihin ng relevance? Relevant ba? Makaka-apekto ba yan sa pagde-decide ng users? Information has the quality of relevance when it influences the economic decisions of users by helping them evaluate the past, present, and future events or confirming or correcting the past evaluations. So, relevant ba yan? Makaka-apekto ba yan sa desisyon ng users? Yun yung sinasabi niya. Ano ba ibig sabihin? Ano ba yung mga ingredients? We have predictive role, confirmatory role, materiality, and then materiality. Ayan, so materiality. 3 lang pala. Predictive role. The information is relevant if it is used to make predictions of, say, future cash inflows or income in the future periods. So, ginagamit kasi natin itong financial statements as a history or as a basis of future predictions, future forecast. Example, pag nakita natin ngayon na ganito yung sales, nagkaroon ng trend for 3 years na increase of sales, then, kung wala namang nabago sa activities ng corporation, then it is just reasonable for us to expect that the sales for this year will also increase. Predictive role. Yun yung relevance ni financial statements. It can predict the future activities or the future movements based on the history in the financial statements. Example sa book, M&O Company's management is preparing the annual company budget for 2012. One of the relevant sources of information for making the budget would be prior period financial statements. Ayun, sinasabi natin na malalaman natin yung budget in the future, malalaman natin kung ilan yung sales forecast, dapat ma-prepare natin yung kailangang i-produce or kailangang bilhin na supplies in the future kasi ganito yung magiging sales based on the financial statements in the past. So, relevance, predictive role. We can use these financial statements in order to make predictions or forecasts in the future. How about confirmatory role? Pag sinabi mo confirmatory role, information is relevant if it is used to confirm or to correct the earlier expectations of a financial statement user. So, if it is used to confirm the previous predictions or to correct the earlier expectations, then that is what we call confirmatory role. Example, corporation manufactures and sells 2 hair products, A and B, and after some time, they have decided to introduce a new product, which is letter C, product C. So, in the financial statements on January 12, on December 31, 2012, at the end of the year, if properly prepared and presented, the financial statements can be used to confirm whether the decision to manufacture and market product C is in accordance with expectations. So, mako-confirm natin kung effective ba, tama ba yung prediction na mabibenta yung product C. Yan yung relevance ni financial statements. It confirms our previous plan, our previous expectations. What else? Next, materiality. Pag materiality naman, ibig sabihin yan, makaka-apekto ba yung amount sa pagdidesisyon ni user? Is the information material, or is the information material, or the omission or misstatement could influence the economic decision of users taken on the basis of the financial statements? Yon, materiality yon. There is no clear-cut amount considered to be material. Pag sinabi kasi natin materiality, we're talking about the amount. Yung amount ba na ito ay malaki o maliit na makaka-impluensya ba sa desisyon ni user? So, wala naman daw kasing clear-cut amount. Depende kasi yan sa corporation, ano yung material sa kanila or hindi. Anong amount yung makaka-apekto doon sa decision-making ni user? So, ang tanong, if management would ask, if this item is misstated or omitted, kung meron daw bang error sa financial statements ng ganitong halaga, piso o di kaya sentimo, makaka-apekto ba yan sa economic decision ng users? Depende yun. O, kung maliliit lang talaga na mga piso, sentimo, 5 piso, of course, it would not matter. Diba? Pero kung ang pinag-uusapan na ay milyon, o, kung 50, sabi natin, 1.8 million daw para sa isang medium-sized enterprise, yung mga sari-sari store. Pag may nawalang 1.8 million, material yan. It would affect the decision-making of the owner. Magsara na lang siya, di ba? Pero kung yung business na pinag-uusapan natin ay $1 million business, kahit yung 1.8 million siguro hindi naman magmamatter sa kanya. Hindi siguro yun material. So yun ang sinasabi natin materiality. Is the amount large enough in order to affect the decision making of the user or not? Yan. So, materiality. Now, again, for the relevance, we have the confirmatory role, predictive role, and materiality. How about reliability? When we're talking about reliability, it says that the information should be free from any material error or bias. Again, it says reliability does not say that the financial statement must be free from any error. It says free from material error. So, dapat yung error na yon ay large enough in order to affect the decision making of the users. Information should be free from material error and bias and can be depended upon by users to represent faithfully that which it either purports or represented or could reasonably be expected to represent. So, pag sinabi mong reliability, pwede ba natin pagkatiwalaan lahat ng mga numero na nakalagay doon sa financial statements? Lahat ba nang nakapresent doon sa financial statements ay tama? Tama kaya yun? Pwede ba tayo mag-rely doon para makapag-decide tayo o hindi? O baka naman may error yon or biased yun? Now, balikan ko lang sinabi natin na material error. The error must be material. Kasi meron tayong mga tinatawag na tolerable error, such as rounding off. Kung kulang ng piso or kulang ng 50 cents, okay lang yun. Tolerable error yun. Kasi that is just due to rounding off. But if that error is material, the amount is large, such as 100,000 para sa mga small and medium business enterprises, edi hindi na reliable agad kung may error na ganun. Ba? Kailangan material. Now, what are the different elements that enhance the reliability of the financial statements? We have faithful representation, substance over form, neutrality, prudence, and completeness. Again, faithful representation, substance over form, neutrality, prudence, and completeness. First, faithful representation. To be reliable, information must represent faithfully the transactions. Faithfully. And other events it purports to represent or could reasonably be expected to represent. So, dapat lahat ng dapat mong makita doon sa financial statements ay naka-record. Lahat dapat ng mga transactions na nangyari ay naka-record at naka-present doon sa financial statements. It must faithfully represent. Kung ano yung nangyari, yun dapat ang makita. Faithful representation. Yan yung ibig sabihin. It means that the actual effects of transactions should be properly accounted for and reflected in the financial statement. So, for example, if the statement of comprehensive income of GHI company shows sales of 120,000, it means that the company really sold goods for this amount. So, kung ano yung nakalagay doon sa income statement, kung ano nakalagay doon ng 120,000 na sales, dapat totoong nangyari na may 120,000 na sales. It must be a faithful representation of the transactions. Dapat kung ano yung nangyaring transaction, yun din na nakapresent sa financial statement. Walang kulang, walang labis. Kung ano yung totoo, it must be transparent. It must be presented faithfully. Next, substance over form. It is necessary that the transactions and other accountable events are accounted for and presented in accordance with their substance and economic reality and not merely their legal form. The substance of transactions or other events is not always consistent with that which is apparent from the legal form. Ano ba ibig sabihin nito? Sometimes, class, hindi naman kasi lahat ng transactions ay consistent with their legal form. Sometimes, the legal title is not passed yet to the entity or the corporation. But in substance, pagmamay-ari na yan ni company or enterprise. An example, sa lupa. Pag bumili ka ng lupa, hindi naman agad-agad yung legal title niyan mapapasa sa'yo. I mean, yung title na nakalagay doon sa certificate, sa transfer title certificate. Sa transfer certificate of title, mayroon, sa TCT, hindi naman agad-agad natatransfer yon kung sino yung nakalagay doon sa titulo. Pero binayaran mo na yon. Kaya kahit hindi pa ikaw na enterprise or corporation ang nakalagay doon sa titulo, dahil binayaran mo na yon, lupa mo na yon, assets mo na yon. Wag mo nang antayin na malipat legally yung title doon sa document na yon bago mo i-record sa financial statements mo yung lupa or yung asset. Substance over form. So, as long as there is already full payment or payment of the asset, such that it means that you already own the asset, except that the legal form does not show that it is already your property, you still have to present that in the financial statements. Yun yung sinasabing substance over form. Hindi yung form ang sinusunod natin, kung ano talaga yung substance. Okay? Next, neutrality. Pag sinabi mo neutrality, financial statements must be free from bias. It must be free from bias. Neutral. Walang kinikilingan. Financial statements are not neutral if by selection or presentation of information, they influence the making of a decision or judgment in order to achieve a predetermined result or outcome. So, dapat kung ano lang, para tong faithful representation. Kung ano lang yung dapat nangyari, yun din yung dapat na nakapresent. It must be free from bias. The financial statements must not be prepared in order to favor the enterprise. There must be no such thing. So, example, ABC company is applying for a loan with BPI. One of the bank's requirements for ABC is to provide the latest financial statements. Ngayon, ang ginawa ni management, para maging mabango ang income statement ni management, ang ginawa niya, nag-increase siya ng sales, nag-increase siya ng income para ma-approve yung loan. So what happened? That is not neutral. That is full of bias. That financial statement cannot be relied upon because there is violation of neutrality. The financial statement was prepared with the intention of overstating the income by understating the expenses in order just to have the approval, in order to obtain the approval from the bank. So aside from it violates the neutrality, it also violates the faithful representation. Kasi binawasan mo yung expenses para lang maging mataas yung income. So hindi na totoo yan. Hindi na yan yung faithful representation ng transactions dati dahil meron ng omission. Tinanggal mo yung expenses. Next, prudence. Prudence is the inclusion of a degree of caution in the exercise of judgment needed in making the estimates, whether under the conditions of uncertainty, such that the assets or income are not overstated and liabilities or expenses are not understated. Whenever an accountant encounters liabilities or expenses that are not understated, whenever an accountant encounters situations involving reporting uncertainties, application of prudence requires that the accountant must choose an alternative or accounting method which results in higher expense or lower income. The intentional understatement of income or overstatement of expenses is not a proper application of prudence. So, pag sinasabi mong prudence, if there are uncertainties, ito, mag-a-apply kasi yung prudence sa mga uncertainties. If there are uncertainties, the corporation or the enterprise must expect the highest degree of exposure. Kung ano yung less favorable sa enterprise, yun dapat yung sundin niya. Because that is conservative, that is prudent. Na example, pag nagkaroon ng sunog sa isang warehouse, nagkaroon ng sunog sa warehouse ni company A, at ang estimated daw na loss, which cannot yet be fully determined, is ranging from 30,000 pesos damages to 50,000 pesos damages. Since it cannot yet be determined kung 30,000 ba, 50 or less or more, then dapat pag prudent or conservative, piliin mo yung highest na exposure. Doon ka sa 50,000 pesos na loss. Huwag ka doon sa 30,000 pesos na loss. Para in the event na talagang 50,000 pesos, edi hindi ka nag-understate ng expense mo. Hindi ka nag-understate ng losses mo. Unlike pag pinili mo yung mas mababang amount, 30,000 to 50,000 dapat daw yung loss. Pinili mo 30,000, kung totoong 50,000 pesos pala, di nag-understate ka ng expenses mo. So when you say prudent, it is more important for you to anticipate the higher exposure. Kung ano yung mas conservative, kung ano yung less favorable. Now, pag completeness naman, lastly, completeness. The information in financial statements must be complete with bounds of materiality and cost. An omission can cause information to be false or misleading and thus unreliable. And of course, when you say reliable, it must be complete. Not only that it faithfully represents a transaction, the amount must be proper, must be correct, it must also be complete. Kasi pag may transaction dyan na hindi na isama, hindi na i-record, hindi na yan reliable. It is no longer reliable. How can I rely as a user kung kulang-kulang naman pala yung record mo? Hindi na ako pwede magtiwala dyan. Baka mamaya ma-mislead pa ako. So, kailangan complete. So, again, pag sinabi mong reliable, ano ulit? Number 1, faithful representation. Number 2, substance over form. Next, neutrality. Next, prudence. And then, lastly, completeness. And, for our contents, diba kanina, 2 R, reliability and relevance. That is for the content. Ito pala, for our presentation na, The qualitative characteristics for the presentation is understanding and understandability and comparability. Understandability, from the word itself, it must be readily understandable by users. Dapat maayos. It must be properly presented. The form must be properly presented. Dapat ang financial statement mo, hindi in paragraph form. Dapat in amounts. Kailangan nakalagay in amounts, hindi yung words. Hindi. Yung notes to financial statements, okay lang yun na words. Pero, yung amounts, yung amount ng assets, magkano yung cash, magkano yung liabilities, dapat in the form of amounts. And it must be properly presented. For this purpose, users are assumed to have a reasonable knowledge of business and economic activities. So, dapat dito, pag sinabi mo understandability, the terms must be understandable. It must not be highfalutin. Kailangan naiintindihan. But we have the assumption that the users of the financial statements have the basic knowledge of accounting. Meron naman silang alam. Kaya if the information is complex, or it's about complex matters which are relevant to the users, we should not exclude this information just because these are too difficult to understand. Kasi nga, again, these users of the financial statement has or have a basic knowledge about the accounting, and they have the willingness to study the information with reasonable diligence. So, hindi naman ibig sabihin na dapat understandable. Pag complex na yung matter, tanggalin mo, hindi. Hindi mo dapat i-exclude yun. Isama mo pa rin. With the presumption that these users will, of course, study and and perform reasonable diligence in studying the information. So, where necessary, additional explanation need to be included in the financial statements in order to facilitate the understanding. Kaya meron tayong mga notes to financial statements para mas maintindihan pa yung financial statements. So, again, pag understandability, kailangan hindi highfalutin, dapat basic yung terms, yung accounting terms, because it must not be very difficult for the users. Kasi nga, gusto natin na bigyan sila ng financial statements in order for them to have an informed and reasonable judgment. Pero hindi mo ibig sabihin na understandable dapat. Pag may mga mahihirap na, tanggalin mo, hindi. Lagay mo pa rin doon. Kasi nga, again, we have the assumption that these users have basic knowledge of the accounting and they have the reasonable diligence to study. And they also have the willingness to study the financial statements. And then, lastly, comparability. Pag sinabi mong comparable, dalawa yan, intra-comparability and intercomparability. Pag intra-comparability, it is just within the enterprise. Intra-comparability, which means that the financial statements for this period must be comparable to the previous period or to the other periods. Example, well-prepared and presented financial statements for 2012 can be compared to financial statements for 2011 and other prior periods for the purpose of determining improvements in business performance. So, dapat uniform yung format. Uniform in the sense that it can be easily compared from one period to another. Ano naman yung sinasabi na intercomparability? Pag intercomparability, lumabas ka na sa corporation mo. You compare your financial statements to other enterprises of the same industry. So, kung laundry shop yung business mo, pwede mo, pag comparable yung financial statements mo, you can compare your financial statements to the laundry shop of company B. Yan. So, users must be able to compare the financial statements of different enterprises in order to evaluate the relative financial position, financial performance, and cash flows. A company usually prepares its performance against the performance of competitors and industry leaders in order to motivate itself to greater achievement and address any identified areas of improvement. Okay? Comparability. So again, pag comparability, intra-comparability and intercomparability. Now, we have constraints on relevant and reliable information. Of course, to obtain a reliable and relevant information, it has an entailing cost. May cost yun. And there are different constraints. And what are these constraints? Number 1, time constraint. Number 2, cost constraint or cost benefit. And then number 3, the balance between the qualitative characteristics. So, pag sinabi mong timeliness, there must be no undue delay in reporting the information because it may lose its relevance. Management must be able to balance the relative merits of timely reporting and the provision of reliable information. To provide a reliable information on a timely basis, it may be necessary to report before all aspects of the transaction or other event are known, thus impairing liability. So, may constraint, no? Pero minsan naman, nade-delay din yung pag-provide ng report kasi hindi pa available lahat ng transactions. So, ano ba ang importante dito sa time constraints? Dapat, wala ang due delay. Kailangan, pag nag-provide ka ng financial statements, see to it na magagamit pa ni user yung financial statements. Dapat hindi masyadong matagal bago mag-release ng financial statements. So, kung halimbawa, 2019 na financial statements, it must be released on the first quarter of 2020. So, yung financial statements for 2019, which ended on December 31, 2019, must be available in the first quarter of December 2020. Because if you release that on 2021, yung financial statements ng 2019, wala na. It will lose its relevance. Para saan pa? Hindi ko nahihintay ng 2019 ng 2021. May 2020 na noon. Wala nang kwenta yun, wala nang saysay, wala nang value. So, dapat timely, it must not be delayed. However, as what it says, time constraint. Kung gusto mo naman mabilis, baka naman mamaya ma-undermine yung reliability. Gusto mo mabilis, agad-agad. January 1 pa lang. Diba, December 31, 2019, nag-end yung 2019 na calendar year. Kung gusto mo timely, gusto mo mabilis January 1, 2020 pa lang, meron ka na agad financial statements. Naku, baka naman ma-undermine yung reliability. Hindi mo napaganda ng maayos. Hindi mo na-provide or na-include lahat ng transactions kasi gusto mo naman sobrang bilis. So, hindi dapat ganoon. Dapat balance lang. It must be not delayed, but it must also be relevant. So, it must not be delayed, but it must not lose its relevance. And it must not lose its reliability. O pag cost-benefit naman, ibig sabihin ng cost-benefit, the cost of providing financial statements should not be more than the value of the financial statements. Ano ba example dyan? Ano ba yung mga cost? Ang mga cost usually is the labor cost, or the employee cost, or the cost of the system. For example ng cost-benefit. Sari-sari store. Sabi ni owner, gusto ko maganda yung financial statements ko. I want to have a very high-valued financial statements. So, I will buy a computer accounting system in the amount of 10 million pesos. Pero ang income mo lang pala sa sari-sari store mo is 10,000 pesos every year. Or let's say 100,000 pesos every year. So, the cost of providing financial statements by acquiring a computer accounting system with the price of 10 million pesos is way high than the benefit of the financial information, which has only 100,000 pesos in income. So, OA naman masyado. Mataas masyado yung cost kasi doon sa benefit. O, paano naman kung mababa naman yung cost? Ikaw ay $1 million company. Tapos, iisa lang ang accountant mo. Tapos, manual ka pa. Di kailan ka pa makakapag-provide ng financial statements mo? 3 years later or 52 years later pa. So, mababa nga yung cost mo dahil konti lang nagtatrabaho, isa nga lang. Tapos, manual recording ka pa, napakatipid mo talaga. Pero, wala na. Hindi ka na makakapag-provide ng timely mo na financial statements kasi kopong-kopong pa. Matagal pa yan bago lumabas because you don't have the manpower, you don't have the facilities. Although the cost is low, but the benefit would be low also. You will have undervalued financial statements. And lastly, there must be a balance between the qualitative characteristics. There must be balanced trade-off between the characteristics. No? So, dapat understandable, pero dapat reliable. Dapat timely, pero dapat reliable, complete. Diba? So, yan. Dapat sila ay balanced. So, oftentimes, relevance and reliability are not present simultaneously as desired. Gusto mong relevant, gusto mo masyadong maging maganda, gusto mo maiintindihan talaga ni user, kailangan very relevant. Pero, kung ano-ano man pinaglalagay mo doon, hindi na rin reliable. So, sometimes, both of these are not simultaneously present. But the general rule is, the aim is to achieve an appropriate balance between the characteristics in order to meet the objective of financial statements. The relative importance of the characteristics in different cases is a matter of professional judgment. So, depende na yan. Wala naman kasing fixed na rule. It depends on the professional judgment of the accountant. Kung ano yung mga dapat niyang gawin in order to have all the qualitative characteristics of financial statements. So again, what are the different qualitative characteristics of financial statements? Reliability, relevance, understandability, and comparability. And what are the different elements of financial statements? Pag sinabi mong statement of financial position, assets, liabilities, and equity. Assets, liabilities, and capital, or assets and liabilities and owners equity. Pero pag naman statement of comprehensive income, ano yung dalawa? Income and expenses. Pero pag sinabi mo ng statement of changes in financial position, such as statement of changes in owner's equity and statement of changes in cash flow, statement of cash flows, ano yung mga elements involved? Lahat na. Okay, so remember those, okay? Now, next topic will be chapter 3, which is the recording or journalizing of transactions. So we will discuss that on our next lecture. So thank you very much, and I hope that you've learned a lot.